In this video, I'm going to talk about all of the weird behavior that's been going on with David in Chapter 2. I will talk about his motive secret, why he wanted everyone to reveal their secrets, what David and RA talked about in the second half of their secret conversation, and finally, why did he confess to the murder of RA? But before all that, I want to give out a big thank you to the creator of The Spare Time. This is a fantastic, top-tier fangan. Everything about it is well done, and I've enjoyed it a lot. I feel this theory today is a testimony to the writing in the series. A theory like the one I'm sharing today is only possible because of the time, effort, and skill provided by the author of The Spare Time. So thank you. With that said, let's begin. Starting with the prologue, initially, David is presented to us as a good, outgoing person. However, even within that first meeting, there are clear hints that David is hiding a darker side of himself. More recently, his darker side has come out in full force during the class trial. David would have us believe that he has always been an irredeemable ass, and that he's just been hiding it from us the entire time. I don't think things are as simple as this. I think David is stuck somewhere in the middle between good and bad. While we can see in the trial strong evidence for his bad side, throughout the series, I think there are scenes showing him as a person who genuinely cares for those around him. For example, before David reveals his false secret, he enters the dining hall and sees his classmates arguing amongst themselves. In this moment, we see David by himself showing signs of being genuinely bothered by the events going on around him. No one is paying attention to him. There is no need for him to put on a show, but here he is feeling bothered by all the fighting. Or, after RA's confession of her secret, David comforts her. RA, in response, hugs David, and we can see what appears to be an authentic response of surprise and embarrassment from David. These moments challenge David's narrative about him just being a bad person. David appears to have a mix of good and bad qualities about him. I think Chapter 2 deals with how he perceives himself. Does he see himself as a good person or a bad person? In the beginning, David likely thinks of himself as a good person, but that changes throughout the chapter. Eventually, it ends up with him coming out as a self-proclaimed bad guy during the class trial. I believe the main reason for David's behavior is because he is actually suffering from depression. When David confesses his secret to the class, he tells them he has a family history of depression. I think this is a half-truth. This might be true about his family, but he's leaving out that he himself is depressed. Hints of David's depression begin in the prologue. During David's introduction, Xander leaves to get something for David to sign. David fails to notice that Teriko is still there and begins to monologue his true feelings. One part stood out as odd to me. David says, "I wish I were in bed." I can understand not wanting to go to school because there may be some other activities you would rather do. But staying in bed, to me, seems like a person who wants to avoid more than just school. That seems like a person who wants to avoid life in general. If you were to presume the conclusion of David being depressed, it can also explain some of the other things he says in that moment. Depression can cause irritability and social withdrawal, qualities that can be observed in both his tone and word choice when describing his dislike of being present in this moment. Something else of note is that the positive attitude that he pretends to have may also be a symptom of depression. Sometimes people with depression will actually hide their sadness from others with a smile. The people closest to them may never know they have depression, because they always seem to be happy. In fact, there's a strange occurrence where comedians seem to have a strangely high rate of depression. So David's motivational speaker persona may be a mask that he uses to hide his depression. David's desire to just stay in bed appears to continue into chapter 2. We know he gets up a bit later on the first day, which is normal considering a murder just happened, but on the second day, we see David getting up later than everyone else. While the others are up and already having a big argument in the dining hall, David notably arrives late. This may suggest that David is being affected by something the others are not, and it's causing him to get out of bed later than everyone else. This could be his depression. On the third day, we don't know what time David woke up because Tereko slept in until noon. Claiming that David's secret is depression contradicts David's true motive secret. It claims that David exists to manipulate others. However, I think Hugh has a good explanation for this. The motive secrets have a tendency to be phrased dramatically. Surely, this is just an unflattering framing, right? Well, I think it's clear now, at this point of the trial, how David's actions could be interpreted as it's written in his motive. There may be another way to interpret David's actions. Consider this. From a young age, David recognized his depression and believes that the world will not accept him for who he is. Thus, he lies to himself and others about his depression in order to gain acceptance. He does this by pretending to be positive and outgoing. In fact, he became so good at this, his actions would come to motivate others and eventually lead to him becoming the ultimate motivational speaker. While all a lie, it is justifiable in his mind because no one would accept the side of him that is suffering from depression, especially after he already became known for his motivational speeches. If David had a background similar to this, there can be both a positive and negative way to interpret his actions. The motive secret considers his motivational speeches as lies and a way for David to manipulate others for his own ends. While on the other hand, David's speeches are a way to cover up his depression and to survive. With these two interpretations of David, it sets up what I think is the main internal conflict that he faces in chapter 2. Based on his actions, is David a good or a bad person? Let's consider how this might impact David's initial confession of his secret. At this point, David genuinely believes his secret has to do with his depression. He is worried that his depression will make him look like a fraud and others will reject him. Knowing that his secret will be revealed eventually, he takes actions to soften the blow. David wants to create a scenario in which everyone is able to confess their own secrets and receive acceptance from others. This is why David says he will accept them and try to convince others to accept them as well. If he can do this, it creates an environment where David is more likely to be accepted. In order to get others to reveal their secrets voluntarily, David reveals his own secret first. However, it's not his true secret, but rather an intentional lie. He says he has a family history of depression, but leaves out the part that's truly damaging to him. He omits his own depression. David chooses a family history of depression because it's close to what he thinks his actual secret is. When his true secret is revealed, he wants it to be close enough so that he can have a reasonable excuse for the difference. Plus, he knows that one of his classmates already holds his secret, so he can't really risk telling a bold-faced lie. Just a tiny lie. Let's move on to David's relationship with Ra. Because of David's depression, I think he relates a lot more with Ra than we are initially led to believe. During Ra's confession of her secret, she says a lot of things that I think resonates with David.
I'm not a cruel person. I'm just trying to survive. Why does she get to be so happy and nice? Why did she grow up to be happy? But I never got a chance!
I think David can personally relate to these kind of feelings. David is similar to Are in the sense that they both did not get the chance to be happy. Are was born into a cruel family, and David was born with depression. Because of their circumstances, they both developed maladaptive behaviors in order to survive. Yet they both recognize the errors of their ways and want to change. David recognizes these parallels and feels a connection with Are. With this in mind, I think this can provide a potential explanation for what David and Are talked about in the second half of their conversation on the night of the murder. Ace claims that he didn't hear the whole conversation, but I think that's a blatant lie. According to his testimony, he was literally just outside the door listening in. In the flashback, we can see him doing this. How is it possible for him not to see or hear anything, especially if David allegedly murdered Are at that time? How did he miss David pushing her into the water and then dragging her kicking and screaming across the hallway into the playground right in front of him? I think he ends his testimony there because the second half of the conversation challenges the narrative of David being the killer. So Ace, being the jerk that he is, lies about it. With that said, regardless, I think the parts Ace did talk about are correct. He was correct about David's motive, he knew about David telling Are that she could change, and David confirmed later that he did speak with Are, he just didn't confirm what they talked about. So Ace probably only lied at the end when he said he didn't hear the rest of the conversation. So then, what happened in the second half of that conversation? It is notable that the first part of the conversation is similar to the conversation in the class trial leading up to David's motive reveal. There are accusations of David being manipulative and claims that revealing people's motives did more harm than good, and then a long period of silence from David. So I think the rest of the conversation with Are is a confession like the class trial, but flipped. At this point, David still genuinely believes that his motive is depression. So this is the first time he heard his true motive secret, and is genuinely surprised and may even be a little bit skeptical. However, David related to a lot of things that Are said in her confession. He might think Are will recognize those similarities as well and would be willing to accept and understand him. So, instead of confessing to being a lying and manipulative scumbag, like he does in the class trial, he instead confesses to being depressed. This is where I think a major plot twist occurs. Based on recent events with Are, we might expect her to try to be kind to David. However, her recent changes, such as helping out Eden during the confrontation with Arturo, is based on what David told her about her ability to change and become a better person. Yet this has changed. After Nico tried to murder Ace, the next day we can see Are in the dining hall. She is silent but clearly bothered by something. She just realized that it was David's manipulation of Nico that almost led to another murder, and that David might have been trying to manipulate her as well. After taking some time alone to think things over, she goes and finds David to challenge him. When David explains himself by talking about his depression, Are thinks that this is another lie and an attempt to further manipulate her. So Are, on an emotional level, fiercely rejects David. To avoid being manipulated further, she moves as far away as possible from being a good person. Her behavior fully regresses to how she was before, and she gives David hell. David's worst fears come true. He is completely and totally rejected. This outcome can explain some of David's actions in the class trial. David has always been worried about being accepted by others, but after being rejected by RA, he is certain that he will be rejected by the class as well. So when it comes time to confess his secret, he flips his story. In order to protect himself, David claims to be a lying and manipulative scumbag. Also make note of the way David talks about RA. David is excessively mean. He seems to take joy in her being manipulated by the person that wrote the letter. He also has the rainy cloud analogy, which is just brutal in my honest opinion. David likely hates RA for the way that she treated him during his confession. He also claims that people can never change, because even after RA's confession, from David's perspective, RA never changed. But also notice that when David confesses about their secret conversation, that David only confirms that they had a conversation. He never actually confirmed what they talked about. It is too painful for David to admit what they talked about. David is acting this way because RA seriously hurt David. This behavior displays a major shift in how David sees himself. After Nico tried to kill Ace, the next time we see David is in the kitchen with Terrico, Charles, and Whit. At this time, David is not feeling well. This may be due to David feeling guilty because he thinks that his actions almost caused a murder. At this moment of self-doubt is when he will be condemned by RA. An action that will cause David to question not just his recent actions, but who he is at a fundamental level. RA's reveal of David's true motive secret is radically different than how he had seen himself up to this point. So different that David may not even have believed it at the time. Before the trial, David may not be sure what to think about himself. The motive secret said by RA is later revealed to be true by Mono TV, and his classmates begin to challenge his actions during Chapter 2. At this point, David changes his mind about himself. He believes that he is fundamentally a bad person, and similar to RA in that he will never change. So when he confesses his motive secret, it represents a major low point for his self-esteem. It shows that he gave up on his image of being a good person just trying to survive and embraces himself as a fundamentally bad person. Even though he may seem confident and proud in his confession, in reality, he hates himself. Now finally on to the big topic. Why did David confess to the murder of RA, despite it appearing that he did not? I'm a little unsure about this part, because it makes claims about the murder that I'm not too sure about. At the time of writing this, I am still working on my theory for who the killer is. But despite that, I will share my thoughts here just because I think it's dramatically interesting. When reading David's testimony on how he murdered RA, there's an interesting line. She already had a pretty low opinion of herself, and she was looking for validation from me. It was pretty easy to convince her that she should die. This doesn't seem to make much sense. It doesn't line up with what we know about RA, nor does it match up with the scene as described by Ace. RA was accusing David, not looking for validation. However, because David has to come up with a fake murder plot on the spot, he might be borrowing from actual events that took place, but twisting them around to fit his narrative. David might have been describing himself. David already has a low self-esteem because of his depression. As well, his recent actions that led to the attempted murder of Ace may make those feelings worse. The next time we see David after Nico's attempted murder is in the kitchen with Charles, Whit, and Terrico. David is notably feeling unwell. It may be guilt from his recent actions. So it stands to reason that David might be searching for validation. Because David related to what Ra said during her confession, David may have thought that he would receive comfort and validation from her. However, as mentioned earlier, David only received condemnation from Ra. It is possible that Ra might have even gone a step further. David claims that because Ra was looking for validation, that it was easy to convince her to commit suicide. I think the reverse happened. Ra was upset about David manipulating everyone, including her. She wanted to completely reject David, including the notion that she could change and become a good person. She not only reverted to her normal self, but went even further and became the worst possible version of herself. As she mentioned during her confession, she learned a lot from her sisters. She used what she learned to hurt David the worst way she possibly could. She offered him a rope to go hang himself. She told David that he could find the rope in the storage room on the first floor. Now clearly, David did not go through with it, but I think he may have taken it seriously. David got the rope and brought it to the playground. At that point, something happened and David changed his mind at the last minute. This then creates a major issue for David in the trial. David is prideful. When he confessed his motive secret, he claimed he wanted to keep his pride, so he lied. He avoided talking about his depression for the sake of his pride. The same is true when he says he murdered Ra. In order to hide the shame that he attempted to kill himself, he lies and confesses to murder. David knows that Ra did not die at 7:30 p.m. because he went to the playground later that night with the rope and Ra wasn't there. Therefore, she must have been led to her death at a different time. The note found in the trash doesn't specify AM or PM. That part is missing. Thus, David likely suspects that Ra was led to her death in the morning. But he can't tell the class that because it requires him to reveal his plan of suicide. Thus, David tries to stop the investigation by confessing to the murder. This is notably similar to a concept discussed by Levi earlier in the trial. But in this case, an accomplice has a motive to murder even if there's no chance of escape. That is, preventing our secrets from being revealed by Mono TV. Thus, David ends up being a sort of pseudo-accomplice in this sense. He was the one who brought the rope that would be eventually used to murder Ra, but won't confess his participation because of his desire to protect his secret. Not his motive secret, but still a secret. In conclusion, David is a troubled man. From a young age, he was cursed with depression. However, being prideful, he hid that from the world. He hid it behind a mask of positivity and optimism, a veil so strong that it would go on to inspire others, and he would eventually become the ultimate inspirational speaker. While his words might inspire others, they would never ring true in his own heart. When Mono TV threatened to reveal this secret to the world, David was forced to face himself and the life that he had lived. While he had always seen himself as the victim in his life, he would now come to consider himself its villain instead. Unable to face this part of himself head on, he would now choose instead to throw it all away so that at least, in the end, he would still be able to keep his pride. Thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts, feelings, and objections in the comments section below. And once again, thank you to the creator of this spare time.